Well, it happened. Grief finally got banned in Legacy. Let's talk about what exactly that means for our format, and we'll touch a little bit on the great rebalancing that just happened as 9 cards were banned or restricted across the various Magic formats. Hello folks, Phil Gallagher aka ThrabenU here for another Legacy video. Today is not going to be gameplay, today is going to be analysis. We have finally gotten the Legacy shakeup that we were asking for, and Grief has been banned within the format. Now, many of us were advocating for more than just Grief exiting the format at this time, but we didn't get that. But this is a good start. And we had sweeping changes made across many formats, and I think Wizards of the Coast is recognizing that if they do not actually cultivate their formats, they are actively going to lose players. And while maybe everyone didn't get everything they wanted, this was a big BNR shakeup, and I would like to praise the fact that we are getting sweeping changes to formats because it was necessary. Let's start out by just kind of looking at the text of the Grief ban announcement. It's a couple paragraphs long. It doesn't really say a lot. The gist of it is that Legacy is a powerful format, and most of the time, Legacy is able to self-correct because we have great sideboard cards. We have the entire card pool, more or less, of everything that's ever been printed in Magic. So it's relatively rare that something is so pushed that we can't handle it. But the power of Reanimate Dead, Animate Dead, Grief, Daze, Force of Will was just too much, and these blue-black Reanimator, Riskaminator deck lists were just ultimately too powerful. And so Grief was banned in Legacy, like A+, that is correct, that objectively needed to happen. Maybe it should have happened a little while ago, but it has happened, and I will kind of give them praise for that. But there's another part here. We looked at the new Eldrazi deck, featuring several Modern Horizons 3 cards, and talked a lot about Psychic Frog. However, Grief and Reanimator is such a large part of the current Legacy metagame that we wanted to make the clear and obvious change to the format before making further changes. Specifically, Grief and Psychic Frog are featured together in Dimir Reanimator. Psychic Frog also appears in various Delver Shells, but it stands to reason that it should have a smaller metagame presence once Grief has been removed. So, that is their rationale for not touching anything else in the format as of right now. I understand that approach. I believe that approach is very, very wrong, and I will outline my reasons why over the course of the remainder of this video. But this video is not going to be, I'm going to bash you for not banning Psychic Frog. It could be that. It would be very, very easy to do. Instead, we're going to deal with the metagame that is being presented to us and kind of talk about like what is coming next. But first, I got to pay the bills. So, quick word from our sponsors. Today's video is sponsored by IntoTheAM.com. They make some of the best t-shirts around. They are beautiful, they are soft, they fit well. I love them. Almost every shirt in my closet, long sleeve or short sleeve, comes from Into the AM at this time. If you want shirts with awesome designs, check out their back in stock sale. And if you use my promo code ThrabenU or click the link down in the video's description, you can enjoy an additional 10% off their already great sales. Today's video is also sponsored by TOAMagic.com. So as this metagame sort of shakes up and you realize you might need some new cards, please consider checking them out. Promo code ThrabenU will save you 5% on your order, and you always get free online shipping. And got a big event coming up? You can order online, pick it up on site, and not have to sweat getting all of your various cards on time. All right, folks, bills have been paid. Let's do like an hour of analysis now, huh? Okay, let's start with a general reflection on the overall announcement here. So I think that they did a good job of trying to re-inject fun into formats, generally speaking. Sitting across from Nadu combo sucks. Getting griefed, losing your 2 best cards, sometimes your 3 best cards, sucks. Very fast, uninteractive decks, maybe not the best to play against. Having hyper consistency in your mana base, the ability to fetch up powerful cards like Black Lotus or even Vexing Bauble on a whim, or the ability to incredibly well leverage the fact that you are on the play, additionally getting to play extra Chalice of the Voids. Like, they did a good job with this ban announcement as a whole, with the exception of Legacy, in my opinion, where Psychic Frog also should have gone. So, like, I do want to, like, make it known that overall, for Magic, this was good. For me, Legacy player, Legacy content creator, hyper invested in my own format, this was maybe a miss for me. And in a moment of kind of realizing that they had, like, kind of fucked up with the previous ban announcement window, they are kind of making it clear in advance when their BNR updates are going to be. They are trying to move these so they align with things like the RC, RCQ seasons, which makes sense to me. So the next time we are going to see a BNR update, when Psychic Frog will probably get banned in Legacy, is December 16th. So here is my first major topic for you all. Now that Grief is exiting the format, what was Grief holding back? What can we expect to see coming back? As a starting point, I expect to see a little bit more combo. Combo decks are a tiny, just tiny portion of the Legacy metagame right now. And clarifying what I mean, I am ignoring the blue-black Reanimator deck as a true combo deck here. I am referring to other combo deck lists. It's pretty rare for you to see Storm decks running around right now. Doomsday is relatively rare. Things of that nature. It just doesn't make sense to just jam combo repeatedly into Daze, Force of Will, Grief, Reanimate, Animate Dead, backed by incredibly fast and efficient clocks like Troll of Khazad-dûm. That was just, like, not the best thing to be doing in the metagame. So as a starting point, a small resurgence of combo is likely. Now, tempering your expectations here, it's not like, combo's back on the menu, boys, combo's great again. Combo is going to be better than it was. Maybe not still the best thing in the metagame, but if you are a combo enthusiast, things certainly just got better for you. I think as far as the combo decks go, I would be more inclined to mess around with, like, the Epic Storm or Doomsday than maybe something like an all-in Necropotence deck. Excuse me, Necrodominance deck. So Necrodominance can produce incredibly fast combo kills, very frequently winning the game on turn 1, but I have not been super impressed by this as a strategy, and I don't expect this to uptick a ton, although I could be wrong with my predictions here. During the Grief heyday, it was just not a good idea to be playing cards with the word initiative on them. Your cards were expensive, they were frequently dazed or otherwise countered. Grief was often coming in and taking them, meaning that the singular card that you kept your hand around is not actually getting to fire off. And even worse, Grief, pitch some black card, take your Seasoned Dungeoneer, reanimate your Seasoned Dungeoneer on turn 1, and all of a sudden your opponent has a turn 1 initiative creature that is maybe effectively unblockable, and now they get to back up their initiative creature with Daze and Force of Will. Fuck that. Like, we're out, we're done, we're never wanting to live in that world as initiative players. And so initiative is something that will probably come back a little bit. However, there is a major question coming out of Modern Horizons 3 for the Ancient Tomb enthusiasts. And that's, is it better to be playing Eldrazi with my fast mana, or initiative creatures with my fast mana? And to give you some perspective on this, as of today, when I look at a metagame snapshot on something like MTG Top 8, Eldrazi aggro is about 8% of the format. A Grixis Delver deck, for example, might be 7%. A Blue-black tempo deck list might be 7%, painters around 8%. So other than the blue-black Reanimator, Riskaminator deck list, Eldrazi was kind of the top dog. And Grief exiting the format means that, and this deck being untouched, means that something that was already able to keep up with like Grief and Psychic Frogs now might just be better. I'm going to put an asterisk there because I'm going to loop back to this in a little bit. The next one here might be a little bit surprising, but I think one of the things that was being held back by Grief was actually Delver of Secrets. And by this, I mean the general Delver shell. Towards the tail end of this sort of window between the previous ban announcement and this one, Psychic Frog decks without Grief were much more popular than Psychic, well, were at least as popular as, and were gaining popularity compared to the traditional blue-black Reanimator deck list. And so people were getting the memo that Psychic Frog in the Tempo shell was just as good as Psychic Frog in the Reanimator shell. And I think with Grief exiting the format, some number of players are going to lose the desire to keep that reanimation package within their deck list, and we are going to see more people messing around with the Delver shell. Psychic Frog is good, and figuring out which Psychic Frog deck you want to be playing is going to be one of the most important questions in the upcoming metagame. More on that in a minute. We've got a whole section on that as well. So over about the last month, players were asking themselves, do I want to be a Reanimator deck or do I just want to be a straight Tempo deck list? And there were strong opinions on both sides about which one of those things were better and more viable. Both were putting up really good results. You should expect to see more experimentation within the Tempo shell now as more players kind of default back to the Delvery style strategies. And Nethergoyf was sort of an up-and-comer in the current metagame pre-banning. This is a card that is relatively unimpressive within something like a mono black shell. We've just seen on this channel you don't feed it enough. But if you are in, say, Grixis Delver, where you're playing Dragon's Rage Channeler and Baubles and stuff already, you can feed the graveyard quickly. It is reasonable for Nethergoyf to come back again and again and again. And if you are in something like a Grixis Mirror, where you do not have exile-based removal like Swords to Plowshares, a Nethergoyf can reasonably come back once or twice within a game, sometimes without messing with the Delirium in your graveyard or without significantly reducing its size. It's very common for a Delver deck to physically go through half of its deck in a game. And if you are churning through that many cards and those cards are going to your graveyard and staying there, this card can be powerful. Now, there is a little bit of push and pull there, as when you start going too all in on the graveyard-based resources, cards like Rest in Peace can become very, very powerful against you. But the question I have for you is, like, when's the last time you saw someone cast an actual factual Rest in Peace? In the Grief metagame, that was just too slow. Our upcoming metagame? Who knows? Maybe cards like that are a little bit slower can come back. So recapping our level 1 discussion here, like what was Grief holding back? I would expect to see a slight uptick in combo. I would expect to see people messing around with initiative creatures once again, and I would expect to see more actual tempo strategies that are not hybrid decks. Major section number 2, Frog Fall, or whatever you want to call it. So, prior to the bannings, Psychic Frog was probably the best deck in Legacy in some capacity. Psychic Frog is the most played creature in Legacy in the pre-banning world, and I expect its numbers will only go up after the banning of Grief, unfortunately, because this is just the best thing to be doing in the format as of right now, and it's very, very easy to see that, unfortunately. We like data. Let's put some numbers on this. So, in Legacy, prior to the bannings, Grief was played in approximately 21% of decks. Psychic Frog, pre-banning, was played in 35% of decks. There were a bunch more creatures that were more commonly played in Legacy than than Grief, including Atraxa, Orcish Bowmasters, Brazen Borrower, and Fairy Macabre. Now, Fairy Macabre, like, you can count that as a creature or not. You know, it's a sideboard card. It's probably not getting cast the vast majority of the time. So Psychic Frog was the most dominant creature in Legacy prior to Grief's banning. It will be the most dominant creature after Grief's banning. And the reason that this is unquestionably going to be true is because Psychic Frog fits into all the various types of decks that exist within Legacy, at least for your blue decks. You're maybe not jamming Psychic Frog in your Ancient Tomb deck, but other than that, you're playing the Frog. Psychic Frog is a combo card. This is a great pivot win condition that can distract your opponents. It can help you sort of deflect the idea that you are a combo deck list, as your opponent thinks you are playing a fair tempo deck list, and then all of a sudden, Dark Ritual Doomsday, you're dead. It has some other combo synergies. If you want to get cute, you can discard an Echo of Eons, and you can then just, do your thing, churn through your deck, play a bunch of artifact mana, play some more frogs, whatever, you probably win. If you are counting Reanimator as a full-on combo thing, it's obviously very good there. Not going to reiterate all the ways that Psychic Frog is good in Reanimator. You probably know that by now if you're watching this video. Psychic Frog is an amazing tempo card. Like other 2-mana sources of card advantage that have broken the format in half, such as Dreadhorde Arcanist, Psychic Frog draws you a card and gives you that card advantage turn after turn after turn, while having significant upsides in combat, being able to wall larger Eldrazi creatures, being able to remove cards from the graveyard for Reanimator mirrors. It just does so much. And it's a fantastic control card. Control decks in Legacy right now can play 4 Up the Beanstalk, 4 Psychic Frog as their starting point, and then have 8 sources of card advantage at 2 mana that can spiral the game out of control if they get to stick around as the game goes long. And so, since Psychic Frog is fitting into all 3 of these pillars, combo, tempo, and control, it is just going to be one of the best things to do. That's not saying that every single control deck is going to be on Psychic Frog. There are reasons to be in like base blue-white or base Jeskai. 4th Airlingas is a hell of a drug, but you should expect to see a ton of Psychic Frog control moving forward. If you are a serious tournament goer, my advice is play a Psychic Frog deck until they ban Psychic Frog in December. I think it is just the low-hanging fruit. If you are thinking about Eternal Weekend already, please start learning your Psychic Frog deck rather than trying to force something else in these coming weeks. You'll thank me later with your tournament results. So a massive metagame question moving forward is going to be, which Psychic Frog deck is best? Which one of these things is going to line up the best for these mirrors and pseudo-mirrors? This isn't an exhaustive list, but you should expect things like a blue-black Reanimator deck list that is just going to run something like Thoughtseize rather than Grief, and maybe slot a couple other creatures into the deck list. Grixis Delver is already very good. You're probably not changing any cards from that deck list. A blue-black Tempo deck list can absolutely exist. Again, you can play a Thoughtseize style effect rather than Grief. An Up the Beanstalk based control deck list, maybe in bug colors, ? Seems powerful. You might be able to go into a 4th color there, maybe a 5th color, depending on how greedy you want to go with the mana and how many Blood Moons we end up seeing in the upcoming metagame. And I also think a bug mid-range deck is pretty viable. And here's a hot piece of tech for you that I think people are going to start messing around with again. Why are we not just shoving Leovold into every deck list? If people are going to be trying to build the metagame around draw a card creatures, draw a card effects, like up the beanstalk, like why are we not just jamming Mana Dork into Leovold as fast and as consistently as possible? I think anti-card draw effects are going to be quite good moving forward. I think Leovold is going to be much better than something like Spirit of the Labyrinth, though. Spirit of the Labyrinth is still going to die to things like Orcish Bowmasters. I'm going to put a little star on Orcish Bowmasters, and we're going to loop back to that in just a second. So, the frogs, they're coming. Be ready for them. Okay, so we have established Psychic Frog is probably the best thing to be doing in the format as of day one. So what is level 2? How do we start fighting against what we expect to be the best deck? And I have 3 angles of attack that I think are pretty viable. The first is Painter combo. Painter is a generically good legacy deck, and it has a high skill ceiling. That's a wonderful reason to start liking a deck. It offers a combo finish that can goldfish on turn 3. Maybe not as consistently as a true combo deck, but it has the potential to do that on some draws. It has a strong mid-range plan. It has a few different angles of attack, and it doesn't necessarily just fold to a single card very often. Meltdown can be pretty rough, but if your opponent is packing something like a Null Rod instead, you can often just win the game with, attacking with the Fury, attacking with Urza's Saga construct tokens, or something like that. And specifically within the context of this new Legacy format, the blue cards are going to be dominating. Again, they do tend to do that. And answering Psychic Frogs and counterspells on Psychic Frogs is going to be a really big deal. And what else are you going to expect to be seeing in these Psychic Frog decks? Well, things like Murktide Regents, and Tamios, and Brainstorms, and Ponders. And Pyroblast stock and Red Elemental Blast stock is going to go like up, up, up. Pyroblast was already good in the previous metagame, but there was this problem where some of the cards like Grief and Troll of Khazad-dûm that were very, very popular were not going to be touched with Pyroblast, and neither were the Reanimates. As the density of Reanimates and Animate Deads goes slightly down due to Grief exiting the format, Pyroblast is going to be better and better at stopping the opposing blue cards that matter. While red, generally speaking, might not be the most exciting color to deal with Psychic Frog because Lightning Bolt style effects will not necessarily do enough damage to consistently kill Psychic Frog, the blasts are going to be good. They deal with it on the stack, they deal with it in play, and can occasionally also get some value by taking out a massive creature like an Atraxa or stopping something like a Show and Tell as well. I have Painter as a pick for something that will be good very early on within the Legacy format. Now, my second suggestion is one that I don't think a lot of people will actually take because people very rarely pick up this deck, but I think it'll be good, and that is lands. Lands has this paper magic problem of running at least one copy of the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, which is basically infinity dollars. And even by legacy standards, shelling out for that card is a little rough, since it doesn't transfer to very many other decks, whereas something you invest in, like an Underground Sea, would go pretty far. Maze of Ith just stops Psychic Frog, just kind of like period, end of statement. And if your opponent starts to solve that problem by trying to go wide and produces more creatures, they start running into things like the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, coupled with wastelands that kind of make your opponent rough. In the previous metagame, lands was well positioned because you just don't care about the grief and reanimate package. And moving forward, if you are a lands deck that respects opposing creatures well, I think you can be in a really good spot. This might mean a lands deck with white mana in it, so you can permanently remove some creatures. Things like Punishing Fire aren't going to kill Psychic Frog, but if you are, packing 4 Maze of Ith, 4 Swords to Plowshares as a starting point in your deck list, and your opponent has like 1, maybe 2 outs to a 20/20 creature that you could produce, that seems like an okay place to be, in my opinion. In another article that was released today, it was revealed that Nadu, in its current iteration, was never playtested. And honestly, that makes a lot of sense. So, this card that was never playtested, that was just banned in Modern for being too good, is another great way to attack the upcoming Legacy format. Nadu was a deck that was perhaps not getting the amount of attention that it deserved based on its results, given how good the blue-black Reanimator shell was within Legacy. And now that we have lost grief from that shell, I expect that people are going to revisit this. This is still capable of doing incredibly broken things very quickly, and you can do those things while backing it up with counterspells. You can do these things while having a backup combo in Cephalid Illusionist if you want, but you don't have to. You can do these things while playing a mid-rangey control deck that happens to have a combo finish. And your opponent doesn't know how all in on the Nadu you are as they are playing their initial games versus you, and that means that they might misevaluate how important some of your cards are. Like, you can just be playing a Nadu that is like, hey, I'm going to draw a card or two off of activations of this thing, and that's enough to bury you. Sometimes you might pair a Nadu with a Bristly Bill and just go like, yeah, I'm going to fetch, I'm going to draw 2 cards, put some counters on these things, attack you for 5 in the air, and I'm just going to draw some extra counter spells to make this safer. If you are trying to card advantage harder, Nadu might be an okay way to approach that. You could do something like play a Bug Nadu deck that has both Psychic Frog and Nadu in it, and then fuck, that is a lot of cards. That is making removal spells very, very strained for your opponents. So that's level 2. If you are looking to beat Psychic Frog, I would be looking at playing Pyroblasts in something like Painter. I think Maze of Ith is a wonderful card from something like Lands, but I do think you will need to adapt your deck slightly. Grief being gone means things aren't quite as free as they used to be. And if you're looking to card advantage hard, Nadu is a great thing to be checking out. All right. I think we're on 4 now. Section 4. These are some things that I think people are going to need to reevaluate from scratch in our new metagame, because our format heuristics, kind of our rule of thumbs, the things that we know are going to shift a little bit. And so I've got 4 things that are worth thinking about from scratch again. Number 1 is Eldrazi. In the weeks leading up to this BNR announcement, some people believed that a card from Eldrazi was ban-worthy. I do not think the arguments for this were sound and data-driven, but some people presented arguments that Glaring Fleshraker or Sowing Microspawn or one of the Soul Lands needed to leave the format. And I don't think that's true. I think that the Eldrazi deck is now going to be reevaluated within the context of a creature-centric format rather than a graveyard-centric format. Grief plus the Entomb package together meant that the graveyard was one of the most important zones at all times within Legacy games. And now that Psychic Frog is going to be the defining card of the format, the battlefield is going to be the most important zone, with the graveyard being sort of a secondary zone there. So in a format where everyone and their mother is trying to kill creatures, how is the creature deck going to fare? Now, this deck is capable of incredibly disgusting and powerful starts, and its best draws will often feel unbeatable. In Game 1, how does this deck fare when people don't have to dedicate such a huge portion of their sideboard to the Reanimator Menace? It'll still be around, its impact will be lessened, but when people can respect this deck with cards like Consign to Memory that can answer the expensive creatures for a single mana, or with the Blood Moon back to basics style cards that can really hamper Eldrazi, let alone, like, there's also the fact that, like, Painter's Servant, making all of your Eldrazi into colored cards, promotes massive problems for the deck list. Like, I think Eldrazi falls into place as a strong but reasonable contender within the context of Legacy once people aren't so pressured to constantly be focused on the blue-black Reanimator deck list. Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe Eldrazi kind of keeps getting away with it because we will just end up with a new dominant blue-black X deck list that puts the same degree of pressure on the metagame as the Reanimator deck just did. But that at least should not happen for a little while. You're not going to reach that same degree of, like, blue-black omnipresence immediately. People will experiment with other stuff for a little while. Next up, I think we need to reevaluate Unlicensed Hearse. In our previous metagame, this was a very popular card to the point that many of the Moon Stompy deck lists would be playing it in Game 1, often 4 copies of it, to really respect the graveyard. Unlicensed Hearse is great against the Reanimation plan, and it's just okay versus the Psychic Frog plan. And let's put the frog back on the screen for just a second here to talk about this play pattern. So let's imagine that you play an Unlicensed Hearse on turn 1. Yes, your Unlicensed Hearse will probably keep the graveyard in check for the remainder of the game. What if you play your Unlicensed Hearse a little bit later? All right, you target 2 things in your opponent's graveyard, and then your opponent exiles those cards, plus 1 card, in order to keep things from going under your Unlicensed Hearse. So your Unlicensed Hearse, while removing cards from the graveyard, is perhaps not actually going to serve its secondary plan of becoming an 8/8, a 9/9 creature, and then, like, wham! Like socking your opponent in the face and killing them in 2 combat steps or something like that. And the timing of activating Unlicensed Hearse is incredibly awkward versus Psychic Frog. So you activate a Hearse on their turn pre-combat. They just exile that stuff. You activate the Hearse post-combat. That's fine, but you didn't actually accomplish stopping the Psychic Frog from getting flying and hitting you in the face for that turn cycle. And due to the way that priority works, sometimes your opponent will be able to kind of sneak some cards into graveyard. Like, okay, it's pre-combat, your opponent has 2 cards in graveyard. I'm going to snag those cards, like, oh, fetch, hold priority, like, bloop, those 3 cards come out of the graveyard, and your Hearse isn't necessarily going to do the thing that it is there to do. Now, Unlicensed Hearse will still be fine versus blue-black decks. It's still fine versus Psychic Frog, but it is maybe not going to have quite the same degree of oomph that it previously did. And also, if you are expecting Eldrazi to pick up a bunch, you do not want to, say, take 2 damage off an Ancient Tomb and play an Unlicensed Hearse in those sorts of matchups. That's not going to leave you in a good spot. Next up, we need to reevaluate Orcish Bowmasters in the context of this new metagame that we are going to have. Orcish Bowmasters is another card that, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, that casual Legacy players often hate, citing the general argument that this makes many X1 creature strategies invalid, and that it is not promoting fun gameplay patterns. But from a tournament data perspective, like from a format balance perspective, this card has been perfectly fine. It did reach a heyday of being about 40% of the format, but it has fallen significantly from there and is now just a good card within the context of Legacy, sitting at about the fourth played creature in the format at about 23%. A notable difference here, though, from the way things were a couple months ago, is that a few months ago, when you played Orcish Bowmasters, you would just slam 4 of those bad boys in your deck, and it was a defining portion of Legacy gameplay for a little while. And now, if we look at the average number of Orcish Bowmasters that a deck is playing, it is 2.7. So, like, you play 2 or 3 copies of these. It's not even something that you will usually max out on, even if you are playing it. So, why do we need to reevaluate this card? Well, Psychic Frog has the words draw a card written on it. Up the Beanstalk has draw a card written on it. And we are expecting those to be major players moving forward. Are those extra instances of draw a card going to be good enough to make people want to play more copies of Orcish Bowmaster if Orcish Bowmasters is no longer killing threats? So for a little while, Orcish Bowmasters was often serving as a good removal spell, and the creature portion of Legacy has shifted a little bit now, so that the creatures on average are a little bit tougher. So for example, Delver of Secrets, a base 1/1 creature, is not within the top 50 cards the top 50 creatures of Legacy anymore. And cards like Tamiyo are starting to take its place. And from opposing fair non-blue creature deck lists, you're getting fewer Thalias and Spirit of the Labyrinths, and more Thought-Knot Seers, Glaring Flesh Rakers. And these things are harder to remove with Bowmasters, and sometimes your opponent can just not attack with their creature that might be ambushed by Orcish Bowmasters, and make it so that your Bowmasters isn't actually a removal spell. Also, Orcish Bowmasters does not stop your opponent from drawing cards like something like Leovold would. And so your opponent who has the Psychic Frog might say, sure, discard 5 cards, Psychic Frog is swole as fuck, hit you in the face. Yeah, okay, your orc gets 1 bigger, you ping me for 1. You're dead next turn. The Psychic Frog players might not ultimately care about Orcish Bowmasters, even though the card draw has a downside attached to it because of Orcish Bowmasters. So I am still kind of puzzling through what exactly I think of Orcish Bowmasters in the post-grief metagame. I think I have pretty good reads on most of the things that I am presenting in this video. And this is one of those where it's like, bro, I gotta wait and see. I am just not 100% sure here. I also think we should reevaluate Tamiyo in this new world. I think Tamiyo is kind of an unimpressive card that accidentally often ends up being good within the context of Legacy games. I am unimpressed with the front side of this card in most capacities. This doesn't end up blocking and walling something like a DRC. Many of the creatures that are seeing play out of the Eldrazi deck have 3 power or more. Games are often short, so you don't have the ability to actually unlock these clues that you are generating. And let's flip to the back here. And the backside of this card is not particularly good unless it instantly wins you the game. The +2 ability is not something your opponent cares about if they can just, punch this with a Psychic Frog and kill it in one shot. The -3 ability can't be activated the turn that this flips, meaning that you don't necessarily get immediate value out of your Planeswalker before it is destroyed. The -7 ability will win the game most of the time, unless something like an Orcish Bowmasters gets involved and you lose the game instantly. So this is this incredibly high variance card. When games are slow and grindy and you have time, those clues that you get from the beginning of the game can be incredibly powerful. And you maybe can't leave this card unchecked. But the average of this card is pretty low, and having a Planeswalker that can just be eaten by Prismatic Ending for 1 mana does feel pretty bad. Admittedly, it feels real good when you have the front side of Tamiyo, your opponent targets it with a removal spell, and then you're like, haha, Brainstorm nerd, gotcha. And you get to go and dodge that removal spell. So why do I want to specifically talk about Tamiyo right now? The curves, baby. Not like the sexy kind of curves. Mana curves. Unless you think mana curves are the sexy kind of curves, in which case, I got you covered. Legacy is going to centralize around Psychic Frog. So turn 2 kind of becomes a defining turn for Legacy here. Maybe turn 3, depending on how you kind of think of this. When that Psychic Frog is connecting and your opponent starts to draw the cards and spiral the game out of control, that is where games are going to start slipping for many people. So, to maximize the chance that your Psychic Frog gets to do its thing, you might want to be playing a creature on turn 1 that takes the bullet for your Psychic Frog. And Tamiyo fits this category of being annoying enough to probably be worth a removal spell. But your opponent will be sitting there going like, do I actually use the removal spell on this crappy Tamiyo when I might need it for a Psychic Frog later? And if your opponent holds back on answering the Tamiyo, and you turn it into 2 or 3 clues before flipping it into a Planeswalker and potentially generating more value, your Tamiyo all of a sudden looks good. And if your Tamiyo takes the bullet for Psychic Frog, you're also happy with that. So Tamiyo might end up in this really weird position where it is great bait for removal spells on turn 1 so that your Psychic Frog gets to just go and do its thing. This will vary a little bit depending on where we shake out in terms of format speed. I expect with Grief Gone, things on average slow down a little bit, but part of that is dependent on how much combo actually ends up coming back. So yeah, short list of things to evaluate. How good is Eldrazi when everyone knows that creatures and the battlefield and the red zone are central to Legacy? How good is Unlicensed Hearse with Grief Gone? Where does Orcish Bowmasters fall in this card draw world where the trigger doesn't always matter? And how good is Tamiyo? Feel from the future here. I think I didn't do this section justice, so I've looped back after I've recorded the rest of the video, and I think there's one more thing that we should be reevaluating in the new metagame, and that is Abrupt Decay. This is something that I have said in my videos and on the podcast, I believe, a handful of times, but Psychic Frog is worth using multiple counterspells to protect it. It just generates that much value. It puts that much pressure on a game. It can be a giant body. It can be an evasive body. It can be an amazing blocker. It is card advantage every single turn. And as the creature grows, as you discard cards to it, it gets easier and easier to keep making those connections. Either because it's harder for your opponent to block the larger creature, or because the additional cards that you turn through allow you to just keep giving it flying. Things that can say no to Psychic Frog without reasonably being stopped, such as Abrupt Decay or maybe Split Second spells, are things that you should be considering in the metagame moving forward. If people are moving into a bug direction anyway for effects like Leovold that can largely invalidate opposing Psychic Frogs, the Psychic Frog that does not actually draw cards, while still threatening, is a lot less scary and you have more time to answer it. If people already want to be moving into bug colors, then I think Abrupt Decay is really well positioned. And Abrupt Decay can also hit some things like, say, a flipped Tameo that some of your Fatal Push style removal spells might otherwise miss. Sudden Edict used to see a ton of legacy play as an anti-delver tool that could not be countered. But I think in the Psychic Frog world specifically, especially if Psychic Frogs end up getting played alongside Orcish Bowmasters, just random tokens, random Tameos lying around might mean that the Sudden Edict is not hitting the thing that you want it to hit. Maybe we'll start to see something like Long Goodbye see a little bit of play. This is something that can hit backside of Tameo while also dealing with a Psychic Frog. Efficient removal is always great. That's why we see so much Fatal Push, Lightning Bolt, Swords to Plowshares, Dismember, 1-mana answers in Legacy. But sometimes paying that extra mana so that your spell can't be dazed or forced or whatever is going to be worth it. All right, I very briefly want to touch on some post-ban deck lists. And the primary reason I'm going to do this is because, like, the deck lists just already exist, folks. If you go to any major deck list site, such as MTG Top 8 or MTG Goldfish, and you just go and you click on one of the archetypes, pick a major event, such as like a Magic Online Challenge or something like that, and guess what? Grief is not in most of these Psychic Frog deck lists. And so you could just play this with minimal changes and be totally fine moving forward in the metagame. And over the next few days, you would just want to adjust your sideboard slightly. Again, maybe reevaluating some of the graveyard hate slots or something like that. But you can find your Beanstalk control deck lists that have Psychic Frog. You can use the search feature if you're trying to find something in particular. But like moving forward for week 1, you don't need to draft up a brand new deck list. Just start with a deck that is already winning, that contains Psychic Frog from the current metagame, and adjust from there. You'll be fine. All right, let's start moving towards our conclusion. I've got a couple more bullet points for you all. And for the first one, I want to go back a month to another video that I made. So about a month ago, I recorded this video with the Legacy is fucked thumbnail. Kid gloves were off that day. Legacy is broken. Let's fix it. And in that video, I talked about how fundamentally Grief needed to exit the format. Wizards of the Coast has done that. Gold star on that one. And in this video, I talked about how my biggest concern, my absolute biggest concern, was that Wizards was only going to address Legacy by removing Grief from the format and leaving Psychic Frog as the de facto best thing to be doing within the format. And that, unfortunately, is exactly what came to reality. So, in my opinion, Wizards failing to act on the last time that they had the chance to ban something and banning Grief is resulting in Psychic Frog being legal for longer than it should be in Legacy. I am recording this on August 26th, we are not going to get, according to Wizards, another opportunity to ban cards until the middle of December. The middle of December. That is like after Eternal Weekend. And, all of the rest of the tournaments this year. And this is incredibly disappointing. So, if I am correct in my analysis, and I think I am, and Psychic Frog just absolutely snaps Legacy in half, the format becomes completely centralized around Psychic Frog, there is nothing that we get to do about that until December. And I am very worried that people are going to get bored with Legacy and just quit Legacy because we are going to go from a blue-black dominated format that was stagnant for too long into another blue-black stagnant format where Psychic Frog is going to be around for too long. And Eternal Weekend is supposed to be like this really big, exciting thing for formats like Legacy and Vintage. And I feel like Vintage is exciting again with 2 restrictions within that format. Like, people have something to do over the next couple of months. And with Legacy, I'm just like, do I bother showing up to Eternal Weekend? I don't really enjoy playing blue cantrip decks, but if I want to maximize my tournament success, like, unquestionably, I should just be following my own advice and playing a Psychic Frog deck list. And I think the lead up to Eternal Weekend is not necessarily going to be exciting this year, unfortunately, as the format's not solved, but we've been handed the SparkNotes version of what this format looks like already. And that has kind of taken a lot of the wind out of my sails in terms of competitive Magic stuff for the next couple of months. With that being said, I want to end this by saying that today's ban announcement overall is a very good thing. In addition to sweeping multi-format changes, we also got things like a design article on Nadu, where they admitted, we messed up. We didn't test this card as it was printed, and that's a problem. We can't keep doing that. And I end today's video on a positive note, despite the fact that I am personally unhappy about the way that these changes impact me as an individual. The Wizards, you get the shaky sideways thumb from me. You did a bad thing for me personally, but a good thing for a whole lot of people. And I hope players of various formats, end up having exciting new metagames. Hopefully, we don't just see, oh fuck, energy took over modern and we can't really interact with energy counters easily. I am hoping we do not just kind of see that in every format moving forward. Folks, this is a day where I would love, love, love to read your comments down below. Keep them polite, try to kind of make your case for something rather than just complain. Like, I would really love to read your thoughts if you articulate them well. I hope I have given you some wonderful information here that kind of helps to shape your mindset as we move forward. My first post-ban content in terms of gameplay will be dropping on Friday. I kind of backed off of recording to get you stuff ASAP. And we'll see what people are messing around with. I am ultimately excited that grief is gone. And let's get out there. Let's kill some Psychic Frogs, folks. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. See ya.